"Turn that train around," Nathan Cole said to no one in particular. His jaw locked tight, his boots planted on the platform like a man preparing for a fight. "I don't care what my sister promised. I don't care what that woman was told. She's going back where she came from." He meant every word. He had ridden 12 miles in the cold to say exactly that. Then the train doors opened and a woman stepped out into the gray Wyoming morning. One battered suitcase in her hand, tears running silently down her face. Looking at the town, like someone who had already lost everything and was only now beginning to understand it. Nathan forgot what he came to say. If you're watching from your city tonight, drop it in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do and stay until the very end. Because this is the kind of love story that only gets better the longer you hold on. Nathan Cole had not slept more than 4 hours in 3 nights, and he looked every hour of it. He stood at the far end of the Red Hollow station platform with his hat pulled low and his coat pulled tight against the November wind. Arms crossed, shoulders set, the way a man stands when he has already made a decision and doesn't want anyone to talk him out of it. He was 37 years old, lean and hard-worked, with hands that were rough from fences and weather and the kind of labor that never really stopped. His face had the look of someone who had once smiled easily and then slowly forgot how. People in Red Hollow said Nathan Cole was a good man. They said it the way you say something true, but incomplete. They said it with a little pause before or after, the kind of pause that holds the rest of the sentence that nobody speaks out loud. He used to be warmer. He used to laugh at things. He used to be the kind of man who stayed after church to talk with the old widowers and always knew the name of every child in the valley. That was before Clara. Before the fever that came in February and took her in less than a week. So fast that Nathan had barely had time to understand she was dying before she was already gone. And not just Clara, their baby daughter too, born too soon. Too small, never strong enough to fight what the cold brought with it. That was 5 years ago. 5 years was long enough for most people to say a man should be moving forward. 5 years was nowhere near long enough for Nathan to agree with them. He ran the Cole Ranch alone now, 30 head of cattle, 2 horses, a barn that needed new boards on the east wall, and a house that technically had 4 rooms, but functionally had 1, because Nathan only moved through the others when the work required it. He ate standing up most mornings. He went to bed when he was too tired to stay awake. He lived the way a man lives when he's stopped caring about the living part and is only focused on the surviving. The ranch hands came and went. Most didn't stay long. There was something in the silence of that property that wore on people after a while, something heavy that had settled into the walls and the air and the particular way Nathan moved through his own land like a stranger in it. His sister Martha was the one who worried out loud. She was 29, married to a farmer in the valley, and she had her brother's same stubborn jaw, but none of his ability to shut out the world. She came to check on him every 2 weeks. She brought food he didn't ask for and news he didn't want and opinions he definitely hadn't requested. 3 months ago, she had pushed too far. They were sitting at his kitchen table. She was eating. He was drinking coffee and staring at nothing, and she said, "You need a wife, Nathan." He didn't even look up. "No, you need someone in this house, someone real. Not just the cattle and the silence. Martha, the garden's dead. The kitchen's half empty. You're losing weight, and you know it, and you're going to tell me everything is fine, and I'm going to tell you that is the biggest lie you have ever told. Everything is fine." She put her fork down. "When was the last time you laughed?" He didn't answer. She took that as her answer. "I put an advertisement in the Gazette," she said. "The one out of Cheyenne. For a companion, a wife. Someone who's looking to start over." Nathan set his coffee cup down very carefully. "You did what?" "I used your name. I described the ranch. I said you were a hardworking man who needed. You had no right." His voice was flat and cold and very precise. "You had absolutely no right to do that. I had every right." You're my brother and you are disappearing right in front of me, and I am not going to sit here and watch it happen. Cancel it. It's already been answered. The silence that followed was the kind that filled a room completely. Nathan stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to his sister for a long time. His hands braced against the counter, breathing slowly, the way he breathed when he was trying to keep something down that wanted to rise. Cancel it, he said again. Her name is Grace Whitmore. She's 25. She's from Philadelphia. She's had a hard time of it. Nathan. She wrote the most. I don't care what she wrote. Honest letter I have ever read in my life. She's not looking for romance. She's looking for a chance. She just wants somewhere to Martha. He turned around. His expression was the one he kept for moments when there was nothing left to argue, not angry, not cold, just exhausted and certain. I am not going to marry a stranger. I am not going to bring a woman out here and make her responsible for something I can't give her. That's not fair to her, and it is not something I'm willing to do. You could at least meet her. No, she's already on the train. Another silence. Then I'll meet her at the station, Nathan said, and I'll explain the situation. And I'll buy her a ticket back to wherever she came from. That's the end of it. Martha looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face, not agreement, not surrender. Just the particular expression of someone who knows that arguing further will only close a door that might still be cracked open. All right, she said quietly. If that's what you decide. She didn't say it like someone who believed him. That had been 3 weeks ago. Now Nathan stood on the platform in the November cold, watching the train exhale steam and slow to a stop. And everything he'd planned to say was lined up and ready. He'd rehearsed it. Short, clear, kind enough. He would explain there'd been a misunderstanding. He would offer to pay for her return fare. He would make sure she wasn't left stranded or embarrassed. He was not a cruel man. He simply knew his own limits. The platform filled with the usual arrivals, a salesman with a trunk, 2 miners who looked like they'd been underground for a month, an older woman with a carpet bag, and a small dog that barked at the steam. Nathan watched the doors. He was prepared. And then the door at the second car opened, and a woman stepped down. She was smaller than he'd imagined. That was the first thing he noticed. Not fragile small, more like someone who had been carrying too much for too long, and the body had simply compressed itself to manage the weight. She wore a gray dress that had been mended at the left sleeve and the hem. Her coat was a little too light for Wyoming in November. Her hair was dark, pinned back, a few strands coming loose from the journey. She carried 1 suitcase, and it was the kind of suitcase that told a story old. Worn, the leather cracked at the corners, a strap tied around it, where the latch no longer worked. She stepped onto the platform and looked around, and Nathan saw that she was crying. Not loudly. Not the way a person cries when they want to be noticed. Silent tears. The private kind, the kind that have been falling long enough that the person has stopped trying to stop them. She looked at the station, at the street beyond it, at the mountains, in the distance that must have looked nothing like anything she'd known, and something in her expression was not what Nathan expected. He had expected nervousness, maybe eagerness, maybe the calculating look of a woman arriving with expectations and plans. What he saw instead was someone absorbing a blow, like someone who was used to things being hard and had just looked up and seen that this was going to be harder than anticipated, and was deciding, right there on the platform, whether they had anything left. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, quietly, quickly. Then she straightened up, stood taller, took slow breath, and began looking around, clearly searching for the face that was supposed to be here to meet her. Nathan didn't move for a moment. He stood where he was and watched her. And the speech he had prepared rearranged itself somewhere in his chest and refused to come out in the order he'd built it. He walked toward her anyway. She saw him coming, or she saw a man coming, and her expression shifted immediately into something careful and composed. Whatever she'd been feeling a moment ago, she put it somewhere. Her chin lifted slightly, her eyes were dark brown, and they were swollen from recent crying, but now they were steady and direct, and watching him with the attention of someone who had learned that watching people carefully was a survival skill. "Mr. Cole," she said. Her voice was steadier than her eyes. "Yes," he said, "I'm Grace Whitmore." She extended her hand. Formal, deliberate. "I believe your sister wrote to me on your behalf." "She did." He shook her hand. Her grip was firmer than he expected. "Miss Whitmore, I need to be honest with you about something." "All right. There was a misunderstanding on my sister's part. I didn't authorize her to." "You didn't want me to come," Grace said. Not a question. Not an accusation. Just a statement delivered with the calm of someone who had already suspected this and was simply confirming. Nathan stopped. "That's correct, I see." She held his gaze. "May I ask what you intend to do about it?" "I'd like to pay for your return fare. Back to Philadelphia, or wherever you'd prefer to." "I can't go back to Philadelphia." The words were quiet. Final. The way someone says something that took considerable courage to say plainly. Nathan looked at her. "I don't have other options to offer you." "I'm not asking for other options." Something moved across her face, not desperation. Not manipulation. Something more naked than either. "I just need somewhere to be for the winter. I can work. I can cook, tend the garden, help with the animals. I'm not asking for anything that isn't earned. I'm just asking for—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, looked away for a moment at the mountains, then back at him. "I'm asking for a chance. That's all." Nathan stood there in the cold wind of Red Hollow Station, looking at this woman he had never met, who had cried silently on the platform and then composed herself and looked him in the eye and asked for nothing but a chance. He thought about the speech he'd prepared. He thought about Clara. He thought about the empty kitchen and the dead garden and the way his sister had looked at him across the table 3 weeks ago. "The ranch is rough," he said finally. "The work is real. I don't have time to manage expectations." "I don't have expectations," Grace said. "I have experience." He was quiet for a moment. "You'll have a room," he said. "Your own. And wages whatever the work merits. And when spring comes, we'll see where things stand." "That's fair. I'm not easy to live with. I've lived with harder," she said. And the way she said it closed the conversation like a door shutting on something he was not yet allowed to see inside. He picked up her suitcase before she could argue about it. She didn't thank him. She simply walked alongside him. And he noticed that she kept pace with him without any effort, and that she looked around the town with the eyes of someone cataloging, making mental notes, taking measure, not sightseeing. He found himself wondering, for just a moment, what she was running from. Then he pushed the thought away. It wasn't his business. She had her reasons. He had his ranch. That was the extent of what this was. They rode back to the Cole ranch in the wagon, in almost complete silence. Nathan was a man comfortable with silence. He had lived in it long enough that it no longer required filling. He drove and watched the road and let the horses find their rhythm. Grace sat beside him without fidgeting. She looked at the land as they moved through it, the grass gone and gold and flattened by the cold. The fence lines running straight against the hills. The sky large and gray and indifferent. Nathan noticed she didn't complain about the cold, though her coat was clearly not enough for it. She simply pulled it tighter and kept looking. "How long were you traveling?" he asked after a while. 4 days, she said. "From Philadelphia the whole way?" "From Philadelphia." She paused. "I had a layover in Chicago." He nodded. He didn't ask what happened in Chicago. "Or before Chicago." She didn't volunteer it. After another silence, she said, "Is the ranch far?" "Another 20 minutes. "Is there much to do this time of year?" "Always is. Cattle need tending in winter more than summer. Feed doesn't move itself. Fences break worse in the cold. I can help with the feed." "And the house, we'll see," he said. Not dismissive. Just honest. He didn't know yet what she could do. He had learned not to assume anything about anyone. She nodded, like that was a reasonable answer. They came over a low ridge, and the ranch came into view below them, the main house. The barn, the two smaller outbuilt buildings, the fence lines running out in all directions. Nathan watched her face when she saw it. He always watched for the moment when people saw the coal ranch for the first time and understood that it was not what romantic imagination pictured. It was working land, hardscrabble, honest, not particularly beautiful in the conventional sense. The house was solid but plainly built. The barn was larger than the house, because the barn was where the real work happened. Grace looked at it for a long moment. "It's a good size," she said. "It's a struggling size," he said. He wasn't sure why he told her the truth about that. He usually didn't volunteer weaknesses to people he'd just met. "Struggling can be fixed," she said, "if you know where to start." He looked at her sidelong. "Do you?" he asked. She looked back at him with those dark, steady eyes. "I usually do," she said. Not with arrogance, with the quiet certainty of someone who had learned their own competence the hard way. He said nothing to that, but he didn't look away from the road in quite the same absent way for the rest of the ride. The first thing Grace did when they arrived at the coal ranch was not what Nathan expected. He'd expected her to want to see her room, to settle in, to rest after 4 days of travel, to take some time to absorb the situation she'd landed in. Instead, she set her suitcase inside the front door, looked around the kitchen for about 30 seconds, and then asked where the feed storage was. "The what?" Nathan said. "Feed storage. Your cattle are going to need the afternoon feed soon. I figured you'd want to get to it." He stared at her. "You've worked with cattle before?" "Not cattle specifically. I grew up on my uncle's farm outside the city. We had pigs and chickens mostly. But a feed schedule is a feed schedule." He was quiet for a moment. "You don't need to. I need to do something," she said. And the way she said it was not demanding or dramatic. It was honest. Like a person who knew their own limits and knew that sitting still in a strange house with a strange man and nothing to occupy her hands was past them. "Show me the barn. I'll follow your lead. I'm not going to get in the way." Nathan Cole had not been in the habit of letting anyone into his routines. The ranch hands worked the fence lines, and the outer fields, the barn, and the immediate work he kept for himself. It was the part of the day when he didn't have to talk to anyone, when the simple physical logic of feeding and watering and checking could hold his mind quiet for an hour or two. He took her to the barn. He showed her where the hay was stored and how he measured portions. He showed her the water trough and the pump. He pointed out which cattle were dominant and which ones were slower, and needed to be fed separately, or the others took their share. She asked 2 questions. Both were good questions, the kind that showed she was actually thinking about the system and not just performing attention. Then she worked. She didn't talk while she worked. She didn't perform the labor, she just did it, efficiently. Without waste, without complaint about the smell, or the cold, or the fact that her dress was clearly not built for a Wyoming barn. Nathan worked beside her in silence, and found, to his considerable irritation, that the silence was different with someone in it. Not worse, just different. When the feeding was done and they were walking back toward the house, one of the ranch hands, a lean, weather-burned man named Pete, who had been with Nathan for 2 years, crossed the yard and stopped when he saw Grace. "Evening," Pete said, looking between them. "Pete?" "This is Miss Whitmore," Nathan said. "She'll be staying on for a while." Pete took off his hat. "Ma'am, welcome to Red Hollow." "Thank you," Grace said. She looked at him directly, and Nathan noticed that her directness wasn't aggressive, it was just genuine. Like she didn't have the energy or the interest in performing warmth she didn't feel. "Are you responsible for the east fence? The one with the broken post about a quarter mile out?" Pete blinked. Yes, ma'am. I've been meaning to get to it. It looks like it's been like that for a while. The cattle in that section are crowding the edge. They'll push through within a week if it doesn't get fixed." Pete looked at Nathan. Nathan said nothing. Pete put his hat back on. "I'll get to it first thing tomorrow," he said. "I'd do it today," Grace said, not unkindly. Before dark. Pete went to fix the fence before dark. Nathan watched this exchange and felt something complicated move through him. Not offense. Not amusement, exactly. Something more unsettling than either the recognition that this woman had just done in 30 seconds what he usually had to argue with Pete about for 2 days. She had simply seen the problem and named it. Calmly. Directly. Without making it a conflict. He filed that away. The house was exactly what it looked like from the outside. Solid, functional, and bare of anything that wasn't necessary. Grace saw this without commenting on it. She saw the kitchen, where the shelves had been only half restocked. Where the useful things were organized, but the aesthetic things had been removed or simply never replaced. She saw the sitting room with its single good chair and its empty fireplace, and its walls where faint squares showed where pictures had once hung. She saw the dining table built for a family, solid and good, with only one chair that showed regular use. She saw all of it and said nothing about what it told her. She simply found her room the one Nathan showed her without much ceremony. Plain and clean and cold, and set her suitcase on the floor beside the narrow bed and stood for a moment with her hand on the doorframe, looking at the space. "It's good," she said. "Thank you. Supper's usually at 7, Nathan said. "I cook enough for both of us. If you'd rather, I'll cook supper," she said. "You don't have to. I know I don't. I want to." She looked at him. "What do you have in the larder?" he told her. She nodded and went to the kitchen without asking for anything more. Nathan stood in the hallway for a moment after she'd gone. He could hear her moving around, opening the larder, checking the supplies with the same systematic quiet she'd brought to the barn. He went to sit in his chair and picked up the ledger he'd been working through and set it back down and picked it up again. The house sounded different. Not louder, just occupied. The way a house is supposed to sound when there's more than one person breathing in it. He told himself it was going to be difficult. He told himself he wasn't going to let it matter. Supper, that night, was salt pork and potatoes, and something Grace had made with the dried herbs she'd apparently found at the back of the spice shelf that Nathan had forgotten existed. It was the best meal that had been made in that kitchen in 5 years. Nathan ate without commenting on this, but he ate all of it. Grace ate quickly and cleanly, watching the table rather than him. After a few minutes of silence, she said, "The stove has a problem with the left burner. It runs hot. I know, I can probably adjust it if you have the right wrench. 3rd shelf in the barn." "Left side," she nodded. Silence again, Nathan said. Because something in him was unable to entirely leave it alone. "Why can't you go back to Philadelphia?" He hadn't planned to ask. The question had simply surfaced, the way honest questions do when you've spent time with someone, and they've started becoming real to you against your will. Grace looked up from her plate. She studied him for a moment, the way she studied things carefully. Honestly, without panic. "I had a situation that made staying impossible," she said. "A husband?" No, a pause almost, but no, he didn't push further. He recognized the particular way a person says something that is true, but is also the border of something they are not ready to walk through yet. "All right," he said. "I'll tell you more when I'm ready," she said. "Not because I'm hiding things. Just because it's recent, and I haven't." She stopped. Started again. "I haven't decided yet what shape it is." He understood that. He understood it perhaps better than almost anything else she could have said. "All right," he said again. They finished supper. She cleaned up without being asked. He went to check on the cattle one more time the way he always did before bed. When he came back, the kitchen was clean and the lamp was turned low, and the house was quiet. Grace's door was closed. Nathan stood in the kitchen for a moment in the lamplight. The house was quiet, but it was a different quiet than it had been this morning. This morning, the quiet had been the kind that fills a space completely. With no edges, no shape, just absence. Tonight it had edges. Tonight there was someone on the other side of a closed door. And that changed the character of the silence the way a single candle changes the character of a dark room, not eliminating the dark, not pretending it isn't there, just giving it a shape that can be navigated. He went to bed. He didn't sleep, not right away. He lay in the dark and listened to the particular sound of the house with one more person in it, and told himself that this was temporary, and that come spring she'd move on, and that he had not made a mistake by letting her stay. He almost believed it. The first week settled into a rhythm that surprised Nathan by how little he had to force it. Grace woke before him. He discovered this on the second morning when he came to the kitchen and found the stove already going and coffee already made and the left burner already adjusted so it no longer ran hot. He stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at this evidence of what must have been an early morning investigation with the wrench from the barn, and felt the dissonance of a life that had not been touched by anyone else's initiative in a very long time. She was already outside. He could see her through the window, moving toward the barn with the focused walk of someone who had already decided what needed doing. He poured the coffee she had made and drank it standing at the window, watching her, and thought about all the ways this arrangement was going to become complicated. By the third day, the ranch hands had opinions. He heard them talking to each other across the yard. Not conspiratorially, just the way men talk when something has changed in their environment and they haven't decided how to categorize it yet. She told Cobb to restack the feed bags, he heard Pete say. Said the bottom ones were getting damp and we'd lose them by February. Were they damp? The other man asked. Yeah, pretty damp, actually. A pause. Huh, she knows what she's doing, Pete said. And then, with the careful respect of a man who did not want to be overheard making unnecessary observations, she's different than I expected. What'd you expect? I don't know. Someone softer. Someone who'd need more managing. Nathan moved away from the window before he heard the rest. On the fourth day, Mrs. Harlow from the neighboring property came by ostensibly to return a borrowed tool, actually to see the mail-order bride that Red Hollow was already beginning to discuss with the particular enthusiasm a small valley reserves for any event that breaks the winter monotony. Mrs. Harlow was 60 and sharp and had opinions about everything and was generally right about most of them. Nathan saw her arrive and steeled himself. Grace was in the kitchen when Mrs. Harlow came in, working on an inventory of the pantry she'd apparently decided needed doing. She stood up when Mrs. Harlow entered, wiped her hands on her apron, and extended one. Grace Whitmore, she said. Edna Harlow, the older woman said, shaking it and taking measure simultaneously. You come all the way from Philadelphia? I did. That's a long way to come. Yes, Grace agreed pleasantly. You ever been out west before? No. You know what you're getting into? Grace looked at her steadily. I'm learning, she said. That seems like the right approach, Mrs. Harlow regarded her for a moment. Then she looked at Nathan with an expression that said several things at once, and turned back to Grace. I'll bring you a jar of my preserves, she said. Welcome you properly. That's very kind, Grace said. Mrs. Harlow left considerably more impressed than she'd arrived, which Nathan knew because she nodded at him on the way out with the particular nod that meant she approved of something he'd done and was not going to say so explicitly. He found he didn't know what to do with that. The thing that began to unsettle Nathan by the end of the first week was not that Grace was failing to fit in. It was that she was fitting in so well that the absence of her was now noticeable when it occurred. On the sixth day, she went with Pete to look at the east pasture fence she'd identified the night she arrived. She was gone most of the morning. The kitchen was empty. The house was quiet in the way it used to be quiet, the complete quiet. The shapeless kind, and Nathan caught himself twice, about to say something to someone who wasn't there. He put on his coat and went out to the barn and worked on harness repairs that didn't urgently need doing. When she came back, he heard her in the kitchen. The sounds of the house recalibrated without any effort. He stayed in the barn a while, longer than was necessary before going inside. That evening at supper, she said, the east pasture fence needs more than one post. 3 at least, maybe 4. And the tension wire on the north side is getting weak. I'll handle it, he said. I'd like to help, she said. It's outdoor work. Cold. I've been outside all day, she pointed out. Reasonably. I'm not any colder than I was. He looked at her across the table. In the lamplight, she looked tired, the real tired of someone who had worked honestly, but her eyes were clear and steady, as they always were. All right, he said. She nodded, started eating again. Grace, he said. She looked up. You don't have to work this hard, he said. I didn't bring you here as hired labor. This wasn't supposed to, he stopped. He was not explaining this well. You can rest. I know I can, she said. I'm not doing it because I feel I have to, then why? She was quiet for a moment. Considering. Because when I'm working, she said, finally. I'm not thinking about other things, and right now, working is better than thinking. Nathan understood that more completely and more personally than he had understood almost anything in the past 5 years. He said nothing, but something shifted very slightly. In the particular way he looked at her, not a dramatic shift, not the kind that announces itself, just the quiet movement of a door that has been shut for a long time, deciding on its own to be slightly less closed than it was before. The second week at the Cole Ranch began with an argument. Not a loud one. Nathan Cole did not do loud arguments. He did quiet ones, the kind where every sentence is measured and controlled, and somehow lands harder because of it. It started over the garden. Grace had found the remnants of it behind the house, a patch of ground that had once been properly worked and was now a hardened mess of dead stalks and compacted soil and weeds that had taken over so completely. They'd almost disguised what the space used to be. She stood looking at it one morning, with her hands in her coat pockets, and Nathan found her there when he came around the corner of the house and saw her studying the ground with that particular focused expression she got when she was calculating something. That's not a project for this time of year, he said. I know, she said. I'm planning for spring. You might not be here in spring. She looked at him. You said we'd see where things stand in spring. It's not spring yet. He had nothing to say to that because she was right. I want to turn the soil before it freezes solid, she said. Get the dead growth cleared out. If we wait until spring, there's too much work to do all at once. The ground's already half frozen, the top inch. Not below that, she looked at him steadily. I'll do it myself. I'm not asking you to help. I didn't say you couldn't do it. Your face did. He opened his mouth. Closed it. There was something disarming about the way she said that, not accusatory, just accurate, the way she named most things. There's a fork in the barn, he said finally. Long handle, left wall, I already found it, she said, and walked back toward the house to get her heavier coat. Nathan stood by the dead garden for a moment after she'd gone and felt something he didn't have an easy name for. It wasn't irritation. It wasn't admiration exactly. It was more like the feeling of watching someone dismantle an assumption you'd made and replace it with something that worked better, and being unable to argue against the improvement. He went to work the east fence. By midday, he came back past the garden, and she had cleared a full third of it. The dead stalks were piled to one side. The soil where she'd turned it was dark and rich under the frozen surface. Exactly as she'd said it would be. She was working at a steady pace. Not frantic, not slow, the way someone works when they know their own endurance and have made a pact with it. She didn't look up when he walked past. He slowed without fully stopping. You eat this morning, he asked. Coffee, she said. That's not eating. She paused her work and looked at him. Are you concerned about my welfare, Mr. Cole? He was already walking toward the house. Dinner's in an hour. Don't be late. He heard what might have been a quiet sound behind him, not quite a laugh. Too brief for that, but something in the direction of one. He didn't look back, but he made sure there was enough for two. That afternoon, Pete came to Nathan at the barn, with the expression of a man who was about to say something he wasn't entirely sure he should. She asked me about the water situation, Pete said. What about it? The pump on the north side. She said it's losing pressure. Pete hesitated. She's right. I've been noticing it for about a month. Didn't want to say anything, because I know fixing it means pulling the line up, and that's a whole day's work at least. Nathan looked at him. You noticed it for a month and didn't say anything. I was going to. When Pete didn't answer that. Nathan said, Tell her what it needs. We'll do it Thursday. Pete blinked. Tell her? You want me to. She's going to ask you again regardless. Might as well give her the information. Pete scratched under his hat. She's thorough, he said. It was the most diplomatic thing he could find. Yes, Nathan said. She is, what Nathan did not say. And what he spent most of that afternoon not thinking about was that the pump problem was one he had noticed 14 months ago and had not fixed, because fixing it required a level of initiative about the ranch's future that he had not been capable of for a long time. If you were not planning to be somewhere in 5 years, you fixed what was breaking right now and let the rest go. The pump had been one he was letting go. The fact that Grace had found it in 11 days was not surprising. The fact that it bothered him was not because she'd found a problem, because finding it meant she was thinking about the ranch's future. She was cataloging, planning, projecting forward in time the way a person does when they intend to still be somewhere. And Nathan had not allowed himself to think that way about his own land for so long, that seeing someone else do it with a kind of unself-conscious practicality felt like watching a language he used to speak and had nearly forgotten. That evening he sat with the ledger after supper and went through the accounts the way he sometimes did when his mind needed something to hold on to. The numbers were not good. They were not catastrophic. The ranch was surviving, in the literal sense, but they were the numbers of a place that was being maintained rather than built, sustained rather than grown. He had known this for years. He had not done much about it. Grace came into the kitchen for water and stopped when she saw the ledger spread open on the table. Sorry, she said. I'll come back. You're not interrupting anything. She filled her glass and was about to leave. But she paused by the table and glanced at the columns of numbers, not nosily. Just the automatic reading of a person who processes information when it's in front of them. The winter feed cost more than last year, she said. He looked up. How did you? There's a column for it, she pointed. Briefly at the page, the year before column. The numbers are close but not the same. He looked at the column. She was right. Supplier raised prices in August, he said. Could you buy from a different supplier? Hendricks over in Millbrook has lower prices. But the quality is. I could look at the quality, she said. If you want. I know feed. I can tell you if it's worth the trade. He looked at her for a moment. You know feed, I told you. I grew up on a farm. You told me pigs and chickens. Pigs and chickens need feed, she said. Reasonably. Feed is feed. The principles are the same. He closed the ledger. All right, he said. We'll ride to Millbrook next week and you can look at it. She nodded. Turn to go. Grace, he said. She stopped. Do you have any money, he asked. Of your own. I should have asked earlier. The pause that followed was just long enough to tell him the answer before she said it. I have enough, she said. It was a lie, a small one. Said without drama and with a great deal of dignity. He let it stand because he understood the kind of pride that says enough when it means almost nothing. The pride of a person who cannot afford to be seen as helpless. I'll set up wages on Friday, he said, for the work you've been doing. It's fair. She turned back, looked at him with those direct dark eyes. You don't have to do that. You told me yourself you don't do anything that isn't earned. This would be earned. Something moved across her face. Not quite surprise. More like the look of someone who had been braced for something and found the thing they'd been bracing against was not there. Thank you, she said. And then she went to bed. Nathan sat with the closed ledger for a while after that and thought about the numbers and the pump and the feed supplier and the dead garden being cleared in November by a woman who wasn't supposed to still be planning ahead. He thought about all of it. He thought about all of it, and then he thought about how long it had been since he had done the same. He opened the ledger again and kept working. It was the latest he'd stayed up in years. The following Thursday arrived with iron-gray clouds and the smell of snow not yet fallen but absolutely coming. And Nathan and Pete and Grace spent the morning pulling up the pump line on the north side. It was hard, cold, unpleasant work the ground resisted, and the line was more corroded than any of them had expected, and Pete cut his hand on a frozen clamp and had to stop to wrap it, which left Grace and Nathan working the line together. They worked in silence for a stretch, the efficient silence of two people whose movements had begun, over the past 2 weeks, to coordinate without being directed. "Hold the pipe steady," Nathan said. She held it. He worked the fitting free. It came loose with a sound like an argument ending. "The corrosion is worse on this end," she said, looking at the fitting. "I know. How long has the pressure been dropping?" He kept his eyes on what he was doing. "A while. More than 6 months? About 14 months. She didn't say anything to that. She didn't make it pointed or accusatory. She simply absorbed the information and moved on. "We'll need to replace 6 feet of line at least," she said. "I know. I could go to the hardware when we ride to Millbrook next week. Get what's needed." "All right, Nathan." She used his first name. It was the second time she'd done it. The first had been accidentally, in the middle of a sentence about the cattle, and he'd noticed but not commented. This time it was deliberate. He could tell by the slight change in her voice. He looked at her. "You're a good rancher," she said. "Anyone can see that. The cattle are well, the fences hold. The land is managed. You didn't let it fall apart." She held his gaze. "But there are things you stopped doing because you stopped caring about them the way you used to. I'm not saying this to criticize. I'm saying it because I can see the difference between a problem you missed and a problem you couldn't make yourself fix." He was very still. "The pump wasn't a problem you missed," she said quietly. The cold air sat between them. Nathan looked back at the fitting in his hands. His jaw was set. Something was moving in him that he had no interest in examining right now. In the frozen dirt of the north pasture, with Pete 20 yards away, wrapping his hand. "The line needs 6 feet replaced," he said. "I'll write it in the supply list." She let it go. She was good at that too, pushing exactly far enough and then letting the silence do the rest. They fixed the pump. It took until late afternoon. By the time they were done, the snow had started, small and light and preliminary, and Nathan's hands were cold through his gloves, and he was tired in the good, honest, clean way that real work produces. At supper that night, Pete, who had 3 whiskeys at the table that he'd brought from his own bunkhouse and was therefore more communicative than usual, said to Grace, "Where'd you learn to work like that? Honest. Weren't no Philadelphia lady I ever met could hold a pump line in frozen ground for 4 hours." Grace looked at him. "My uncle believed everyone earned their place," she said. "Nobody in his house rested while there was work to be done. Including me. Your folks let you live with your uncle." A pause. "My mother died when I was 8, Grace said. My father couldn't manage alone. So he sent me to my uncle's farm." She said it plainly. The way people say very painful things that they have had many years to make peace with. It wasn't a bad life. It was just a hard one. Pete, who had enough whiskey in him to be human about it, said, "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said. "It taught me everything I know. And everything I know has been useful." She looked down at her plate. Nathan had been very still during this exchange, watching her, and he was aware that what she'd just shared was more than she'd told him in 2 weeks. More personal history than she'd offered willingly. He thought about what she'd said. "My father couldn't manage alone, so he sent me away." He thought about that for the rest of the evening and didn't say anything about it. Because some things a person tells you are not an invitation for a response. They're just something they needed to say out loud to see how it sits. The snow came down steadily that night. By morning, there was 4 inches on the ground, and the temperature had dropped enough that the air had an edge to it that meant business. Nathan woke early. He always woke early, and went to the kitchen and found, again, that Grace was already there. But this morning she was not making coffee. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a piece of paper in front of her and a pen in her hand, and she was crying. Not the way she'd been crying at the train station. Those had been silent tears. The kind that fall when you've been holding something too long. These were fresh ones, recent. The kind that come when something has broken through defenses that were not strong enough. She heard him come in, and she did something he would think about for a long time afterward. She didn't hide it. She didn't quickly wipe her face and straighten and pretend. She looked up at him with red eyes and held his gaze for a moment, and then looked back down at the paper. "Sorry," she said. "I didn't think you'd be up yet." He came to the stove, put the kettle on, didn't say anything right away. After a moment, he said, "You don't have to apologize. I'm not usually like this," she said. "I'm fine during the day. It's just the mornings." He turned around and leaned against the counter and looked at her. Not pityingly, not with the particular discomfort some men have around women's pain, the need to make it stop or look away from it. He just looked at her the way you look at someone who is real. "What's in the letter?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "I wrote to my cousin in Philadelphia," she said, "last week, to let her know I was safe." She touched the edge of the paper. She wrote back. "She told me what happened after I left." A pause. "There was a man in Philadelphia. I was going to marry him." Nathan waited. "He wasn't who I thought he was," she said. "He was already married. Had been for years. He looked for women who didn't have much protection, who wouldn't make trouble, who could be managed." Her voice was steady. "Just barely. When I found out, I tried to leave quietly. He threatened to ruin my reputation unless I stayed. He said no one would believe me over him. He was a respected man." She looked up, and her eyes were completely dry now. Dried out by the specific cold fury of someone describing an injustice they did not consent to. "So I left with what I could carry, and I came here." The kitchen was very quiet. "Your cousin's letter," Nathan said carefully. "What did she say?" Grace looked at the paper. "He's telling people in the city that I stole from him money and jewelry." Her voice did not waver. "He has people who will say they saw me. He has a lawyer." She set the paper down flat. "My name is being destroyed in a city I'll never go back to. By a man who is doing it because I refuse to be afraid of him." Nathan straightened off the counter. He stood with his hands at his sides and his jaw working, and something in his eyes that Grace had not seen there before. "Can your cousin do anything?" he asked. "She's not in a position to. She has her own situation to protect. Is there evidence of what he did? Letters? Anything?" Grace looked at him with a slightly startled expression, as if she'd expected something else from him. Some attempt at comfort, some uncertain reassurance. And, instead, gotten the direct question of a man thinking about what could actually be done. "I have his letters," she said, "the ones he sent me. Before I knew. A pause after I found out. I kept them. I didn't know why. I kept them." "Where are they?" She looked at him for a long moment. "In my suitcase." Nathan nodded slowly. "You should keep them," he said. "You should keep them somewhere safe, and you should not let anyone know you have them. That is leverage. Small, maybe not immediate, but real." She stared at him. "Why does this matter to you?" The question came out before she could soften it. And it was a real question she genuinely wanted to know. Nathan looked at her, and the thing he was feeling was not easy to categorize. It was not pity. He had known for 2 weeks that this woman did not want or need pity. It was something closer to the recognition of an injustice that had been done to someone who deserved better, coupled with the hard particular anger of a person who has lost things to forces outside their control and recognizes that pattern when they see it happening to someone else. "Because you came here honest," he said. "You told me the truth about what you could do, and then you did it. That's more than most people manage." He picked up the kettle. "And what was done to you was wrong. That matters regardless of whether it's my business." She watched him pour the water into the pot. The kitchen was warm, and the snow was coming down outside, and Grace Whitmore sat at the table with her cousin's letter and her dried eyes, and looked at Nathan Cole with an expression that was, for the first time since she'd arrived, not entirely guarded. "I'll keep the letters safe," she said. "Good," he said. He brought her coffee, without asking if she wanted it. She wrapped both hands around the cup, and they sat at the kitchen table, with the snow falling outside and the warmth building from the stove. And, for the first time, they were not simply in the same room, they were actually in the same room. With each other, without the careful distance of two strangers negotiating territory. It was small, it was quiet. It was, Nathan would realize much later, the actual beginning. The weeks that followed were marked by small things that accumulated. There was the morning Grace came in from the barn and announced, without preamble, that one of the cattle had a leg condition that would cost them in spring if it wasn't addressed now. And did Nathan know that old man Whitfield, 3 properties east, had a remedy he'd used for years that actually worked? Nathan had said he didn't know that, and she had said she'd learned it from Pete, who learned it from Whitfield. And she was going to ride over and ask him about it directly if Nathan didn't object. He didn't object. She came back with the remedy and the information, and also somehow with a standing invitation for them both to Sunday dinner at the Whitfields, which Nathan had been avoiding for 3 years because Edna Whitfield had 2 unmarried daughters and a relentless optimism about matchmaking. He told Grace this on the ride back. She laughed. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh. A real one, not polished, not performed, just sudden and genuine. Surprised out of her by what he'd said. It changed her face completely. It made her look younger and more unguarded than he'd seen her. And it did something to the air between them that he had to actively choose not to look at directly. "We'll just both be unavailable," she said. "It'll disappoint her thoroughly and evenly. She'll find another angle," he said. "Then we'll be unavailable to that one too." He said nothing. "Unless it makes you uncomfortable," she said. "Being seen together. Arriving together," he thought about that. "Does it make you uncomfortable?" "I asked first," she said. He looked at the road ahead. "No," he said. "It doesn't make me uncomfortable." She nodded. "Looked forward to." "Then it's settled," she said. They went to Sunday dinner at the Whitfields. It was fine. Edna Whitfield was pleasant, and her daughters were perfectly agreeable, young women, and Grace was cordial and watchful, and Nathan said the minimum required number of polite things and came home feeling, to his considerable bewilderment, less depleted than he usually did after social obligation. He mentioned this to no one, but Martha noticed anyway. Martha came by on a Tuesday as she did every 2 weeks. And this time she found Nathan at the kitchen table with Grace. Going through the ledger together, Grace had found a discrepancy in the supplier accounts from the previous police fall, and they were tracing it back through 3 months of records. Martha stood in the doorway and watched this for a moment before either of them heard her. "Hello," Martha said. Nathan looked up. "Martha, am I interrupting?" "Yes," Nathan said. "Come in." Martha came in with the expression of someone trying very hard not to look triumphant and failing moderately. "You must be Grace," she said, with the warmth of a woman who has been hoping for exactly this moment for 3 months. "You must be Martha," Grace said. "Nathan's told me you're the reason I'm here. Guilty," Martha said cheerfully. "He was furious," Grace said. Martha glanced at her brother. "I know. He's always furious when I'm right." Nathan put his pen down. "Neither of you are as amusing as you think you are." "You're smiling," Martha pointed out. "I'm not." "You almost are. It's the same thing." She sat down at the table and looked at Grace with the direct interest of a woman who had worried for years and was now reassessing everything. "Is he impossible to live with?" "He's manageable," Grace said. "He's sitting right here," Nathan said. "I know," both women said simultaneously, and then looked at each other. And Martha's face broke into the full, genuine smile of someone who has realized that a thing they tried is actually going to work. Nathan looked at his ledger. He did not look at either of them. But he did not try to end the conversation either. Martha stayed for 4 hours. She helped with supper. She and Grace talked in the kitchen about things Nathan could hear but was not specifically following: the Whitfield dinner, the north pasture, the pump repair, the garden plan for spring. He heard his sister laugh 3 times at things Grace said. He heard Grace laugh once at something. Martha told her a story about Nathan at 16 trying to break a horse that had firmly different ideas about being broken. He fell off 4 times, Martha called from the kitchen. 4. And he got back on every time with the exact same expression he has right now when anyone questions his decisions. "I can hear you," Nathan said. "That's why I'm telling it," Martha said. Later, when Martha was leaving, she passed Nathan in the hallway and grabbed his arm briefly, and looked at him with a particular look of a younger sister who has loved someone through a very long and difficult time. "She's good," Martha said quietly. "She's really good." "Nathan, it's a practical arrangement," he said. Martha looked at him for a moment with clear, kind, absolutely unconvinced eyes. "Right," she said, and left. Nathan stood in the hallway. From the kitchen, he heard Grace clearing the supper things. The quiet, methodical sounds of someone who had learned the kitchen well enough to move through it without looking. He thought about what Martha had said. He thought about the ledger, and the pump, and the garden, and the Sunday dinner, and the letter from Philadelphia, and the morning she hadn't hidden her tears. He thought about all of it, and about the fact that she had been here for 3 weeks, and the ranch was already measurably different, and he was already against every intention, against every wall he had built and maintained for 5 years, already beginning to feel the particular terror of someone who has something to lose again. He went to the kitchen doorway. "I'm going to check the cattle," he said. "Already done," she said, without looking up. "Pete and I went out an hour ago." He stood there. She looked up, saw whatever was in his face. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Yes," he said. He meant no. He meant something far more complicated than either word could hold. She looked at him for a moment, with those steady dark eyes. "All right," she said, and went back to what she was doing. He went to his chair and sat down and picked up the ledger and could not focus on a single number. Outside, the snow had stopped. The night was clear and very cold, and the stars were out over Wyoming with the uncompromising brightness of a sky that has no patience for what you're feeling and will carry on regardless. Nathan sat in his chair and thought about Clara. He thought about her face and her laugh and the particular sound of her voice saying his name in the morning. He thought about the baby they never got to know. He thought about the winter that took them and the specific quality of silence that had moved in when they left and had lived in this house ever since. He thought about Grace at the kitchen table, going through ledger columns with a pen, her hair slightly disheveled from the barn, asking the right questions. He thought, "I am not replacing anything." He thought, "This is different," he thought. "I am afraid, and the fear is the most honest thing I have felt in years. Which means something is alive in me that I thought was dead, and I do not know whether to be grateful for that or terrified." He sat with all of it. The house was quiet, but it was the good quiet now. The kind with edges. The kind that knew someone was on the other side of a door. He closed the ledger and went to bed. He did not sleep for a long time. But for the first time in 5 years, what kept him awake was not grief. It was something else entirely. Something that had no safe name yet. But that was there, undeniably, like a fire that someone had started in a room you had long since stopped expecting any warmth from. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. Nathan was in the barn when Grace came to find him. And he knew, before she said a word, that something had changed. He had learned her face well enough by now, 4 weeks of the same kitchen, the same table, the same evenings in the lamplight, to read its moods the way you read weather. Not perfectly, not completely, but well enough to know when the sky was about to shift. She stood in the barn doorway with an envelope in her hand, and her expression was not the careful composure she usually wore. It was something harder, something that had been struck. "He knows where I am," she said. Nathan said, down the harness. The man from Philadelphia, his name is Douglas Hale. She said it like she was finishing something she'd been avoiding starting. He has a private inquiry agent. He found my cousin's address. My cousin told him she didn't mean to. I think she was frightened. She told him I'd gone west. She looked at the envelope. He's written to inform me that he intends to pursue the theft claim legally. That unless I return to Philadelphia and settle the matter privately, he'll file with the territorial courts. Nathan walked toward her. Let me see it. She handed him the letter. He read it, standing in the barn doorway with the cold coming in around them. He read it twice. His expression did not change much. But his jaw tightened on certain lines, the ones where Douglas Hale's language shifted from legal to personal, from formal to the particular kind of measured threat that a man makes when he knows how to dress cruelty in the clothes of reasonableness. He can't file in the territorial courts from Philadelphia, Nathan said. He'd need a lawyer here, a local representative. He says he has one. Nathan looked at the letter again. There was a name. A lawyer in Cheyenne, a real firm, not invented. All right, Nathan said. He folded the letter. All right, who's the best lawyer in Red Hollow? Grace stared at him. Nathan, you have his letters, Nathan said. The ones from before. You said you kept them. Yes, but those letters establish a prior relationship. Establish what he was to you and what he represented about himself. If he's claiming you stole from a stranger, those letters make him a liar. He looked at her. You are not going back to Philadelphia. You are not settling anything privately with a man who threatened you. And you are not doing this alone. The silence stretched. Grace was looking at him with an expression he had not seen from her before, not the careful assessment, not the quiet competence, not even the rare unguarded moments. This was something more raw than all of those. Like someone who had spent so long expecting to fight every battle themselves that being told they didn't have to was almost more destabilizing than the battle itself. Why are you doing this? She said. Her voice was lower than usual. I told you before. What was done to you was wrong. That doesn't obligate you to, Grace. He said her name the way she'd once said his deliberately. With weight. Stop trying to talk me out of helping you. Her breath came out slow and unsteady. I'm not used to people staying in fights that aren't theirs. Then get used to it, he said. Because this one's mine now, too. He walked past her toward the house to get his coat. She stood in the barn doorway for a moment longer. And Pete, who had been quietly repairing a bridle on the other side of the barn wall and had heard every word, very carefully studied the wall in front of him and said nothing at all. They rode to Red Hollow that afternoon. The lawyer was a man named Aldous Crane, 60 years old, with a reputation in the valley for being methodical and unshakable and honest, in the particular way of men who have seen enough dishonesty to have developed a personal dislike of it. He had an office above the dry goods store that smelled of paper and wood smoke, and he listened to Grace's account of Douglas Hale without interrupting once. When she finished, he looked at the Hale letter for a long time. Then he looked at Nathan, then back at Grace. You have correspondence from this man, he said. Prior to your departure? Yes, Grace said. Establishing the nature of your relationship. His representations about himself? Yes, Crane nodded slowly. And he's claiming theft of property from a woman he was intending to marry, who fled after discovering he was already married. He set the letter down. That is not a theft case. That is a man attempting to use the legal system to punish someone for leaving him. Can he do that? Grace asked. File in the territorial courts from Pennsylvania? He can try, Crane said. His Cheyenne lawyer can file a claim, but if the correspondence you have establishes what you say it does, his claim falls apart before it reaches a judge. A woman fleeing a fraudulent courtship with what she brought with her is not a thief. She's a victim. Grace's hands were clasped in her lap, and she was holding them very still. What do we do? Nathan asked. You get me the letters, Crane said. All of them. And you let me write to his Cheyenne representative and make clear what evidence exists and what will be presented if this proceeds to court. A man like Hale doesn't want a public proceeding. A public proceeding means his existing marriage becomes part of the record. Crane looked at Grace. He is trying to frighten you. That tells me he knows his position is weak. He doesn't feel weak, Grace said quietly. No, Crane agreed. Men like that rarely do. But legally, Miss Whitmore, you are better positioned than he wants you to believe. Bring me the letters. Let me do my work. On the ride back to the ranch, they didn't speak for the first several minutes. The cold had sharpened since morning, and the sky had the heavy look of something building. Snow tonight, Nathan said. I know, Grace said. Another silence. He knows where you are, Nathan said. Roughly. He knows Wyoming territory. He may not know Red Hollow specifically. He'll find out, she said. She wasn't saying it with despair, just with the clear assessment of someone who understood the Tenatissinav, a threatened man's ego. He doesn't like being left. I think it's more about that than the money or the reputation. He doesn't like that I left, and nothing fell apart. Then we make sure nothing falls apart, Nathan said. She glanced at him sideways on the wagon bench. You're a stubborn man, she said. Most people find that inconvenient, he said. I find it useful, she said. He looked at her briefly. She was watching the road ahead with the particular half-expression that he had learned meant she was feeling something she was not yet ready to name. He recognized it because it was the same expression he was making, and he was not sure which of them was less ready. He looked at the road. She looked at the road. The ranch came into view over the ridge, and the snow began before they reached the gate. The storm that had been building all day arrived that night with the full commitment of a Wyoming winter that had been holding back and was finished doing so. Nathan had seen bad winters. He had lived through them. But this one came with the particular fury of something personal, the wind hitting the walls of the house with a force that made the boards speak. The temperature dropping so fast that the water in the kitchen bucket had a skim of ice by 9 in the evening. Grace came out of her room when the wind hit the northwest wall the first time hard enough to shake the lamp. How bad does it get, she asked. Bad enough, Nathan said. He was already pulling on his heavier coat. The cattle in the north pasture are in the open. I need to get them to the south shelter before the temperature drops another 10 degrees. I'll come. Nathan, it's going to be bad out there. The visibility's already gone. Which is exactly why you shouldn't go alone, she said. She was already reaching for her coat. If something happens to you in that, and no one's there, the cattle are the least of the problems. He looked at her. She looked back with the particular expression of a woman who has already decided and is simply waiting for the man to catch up. Stay close to me, he said. Don't get 10 feet ahead. I know how a blizzard works, she said. I grew up outside a city. Not inside one, they went out. The cold was immediate and absolute, the kind that gets inside the coat and the gloves, and the logic of warmth and works steadily against all of it. The wind made communication close to impossible. Nathan had to lean directly into Grace's ear to say anything, and she learned quickly to do the same, her hand gripping his coat sleeve to maintain contact in the white blindness of the driven snow. They found the north pasture cattle bunched at the fence line, pressing together the way cattle do when they're frightened and confused. Nathan worked the gate. Grace got behind the herd and moved them the way she moved through every physical task with economy and purpose. Not wasted, not panicked. She read the cattle. She understood which ones were leading and worked those. Let the others follow. They got them to the south shelter. Getting back was harder. The wind had shifted and the snow was coming sideways, and Nathan had misjudged the time. Getting the cattle had taken longer than planned, and the temperature had dropped the additional 10 degrees he'd been afraid of, and then some. The path back to the house that had been difficult on the way out was now nearly impossible on the way back. He kept his hand on Grace's arm. She kept moving. At some point she put her mouth to his ear and said, "Are we going the right direction?" "Yes," he said. He believed it. He was 70% certain. She said nothing further. She trusted the 70% and kept walking. When the house materialized out of the white dark in front of them, Nathan felt the particular relief of someone who has made a calculation and found out it was right, which is a relief that is half gratitude and half disbelief. He got her inside. He got the door shut against the wind. The warmth of the kitchen hit them both like a physical thing. Grace stood inside the door with her hands shaking from the cold, pulling at her coat buttons with fingers that had stopped cooperating, and Nathan, without deciding to, without thinking about it, reached forward and worked the buttons open himself. She went very still. He got the coat off her, hung it by the door, got her gloves, her hat. He took her hands in both of his, and the cold of them shocked him, even through his own cold hands. "Come here," he said, and brought her to the stove. She stood in front of the warmth, with her eyes closed and her jaw set against the shaking, and Nathan stood beside her and rubbed her hands between his until the shaking started to ease and her color began to come back and her fingers could move again on their own. She opened her eyes. They were standing very close to each other. The kind of close that happens when survival has been the priority and the moment of survival has just passed and there's a half second where the world recalibrates and suddenly you are aware of everything. She was looking up at him. He was looking at her. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was rough from the cold. "Don't thank me," he said. "You were right that I shouldn't have gone alone." "I know I was right," she said. "But thank you anyway." He let go of her hands, stepped back one step. "Sit down," he said. "I'll make coffee." She sat. He made coffee. His hands were not entirely steady. He told himself it was the cold. They sat at the kitchen table with the storm pressing against the walls and the lamp steady between them and the coffee warming their hands. And after a long silence, Grace said, "Tell me about your wife." He was quiet for so long that she started to say she was sorry, that she shouldn't have asked. And he said, "Her name was Clara." She stopped. He looked at his coffee cup. "She was 23 when she died," he said. "We'd been married 2 years." She laughed at things that most people didn't think were funny. Small things. Things that other people walked past. She noticed the world in a particular way. He stopped. Started again. The winter of '82 was the worst in 10 years. She had been ill for a week, and I thought it was just the cold. I thought she'd be better. I kept working because the cattle needed tending, and I thought she would be better. His voice did not break. It flattened. The flattening of something that has been broken so many times it has stopped expecting the break. She was gone in 4 days. The baby, our daughter, she was born that same week. Too early. She didn't make it past the first night. The storm pushed at the walls. The lamp held steady. "I blamed myself," he said. "Not for the fever. Not for the baby. There was nothing anyone could have done for either. I blamed myself for not being there, for being in the barn with the cattle when she needed me in the house." He looked up. "I have kept the cattle alive for 5 years because I was in the barn instead of beside my wife the night she died. I don't know what else to do with that." Grace was looking at him across the table, and her eyes were dark and steady, and there was no pity in them. That was the thing about Grace. She met things directly. She didn't dress them up or soften them into something more comfortable. "You were doing what you knew how to do," she said. "It wasn't enough." "No," she said. "It wasn't. But you didn't know that until it was too late to change it. And there is a difference between a mistake and a failure, and you have spent 5 years treating it as if they are the same thing." He looked at her. "Clara would not want you to disappear into this ranch," she said. "I don't know her. I never will. But any woman worth loving would not want the person she loved to stop living because she wasn't there to see it." The silence that followed was the loudest silence Nathan Cole had ever sat in. "I know that," he said finally. "Knowing it and believing it are different." "Yes," she said. "They are." She stood up and picked up her coffee cup and walked to the window and stood looking at the blank white of the storm. "The man in Philadelphia," she said after a moment. "Douglas Hale. I wasn't in love with him. I want to be honest about that. I thought I was building something safe. I thought he was the kind of man who kept his word. She pressed her free hand flat against the cold of the window glass. When I found out the truth, I wasn't heartbroken. I was angry, I was humiliated, and I was terrified. Because I had given a man power over my life, and he intended to use it. She turned back. That's why I left with nothing. That's why I'm here. Not for romance. Not for something sweet. Just for ground that was mine to stand on. Nathan looked at her. And is it? He said. Ground that's yours. She looked back at him for a long moment. More than anywhere else I've been, she said quietly. The storm screamed at the roof, and the walls held, and the lamp burned between them. And Nathan Cole sat in the warmth of his kitchen on the worst night of the winter and felt, with an ache that was not entirely painful, that the house was full. Not with noise, not with anything dramatic or obvious. Just full. The way it was supposed to be. He didn't say anything else that night. Neither did she. They finished their coffee, and she went to her room, and he banked the stove and checked the doors, and went to his own room, and lay in the dark. He thought about Clara. He talked to her the way he sometimes did in the dark, when no one could hear, not out loud. Just in the space of his own chest where the grief had lived for so long it had its own address. He said, I'm still here. I don't know what this is yet. I don't know if I have the right. He waited in the dark the way you wait after you've said something you cannot take back. And what came back was not an answer, just the particular silence of a memory that has made its peace. He closed his eyes. The storm blew through the night, and by morning it had passed, and Red Hollow Valley was buried under 18 inches of snow that glittered hard and clean in the early light. Nathan came to the kitchen, and Grace was already there, and the coffee was already made. And neither of them mentioned the night before, and somehow the not mentioning was not avoidance. It was more like the agreement of two people who understood that some things don't need to be talked back into nothing. Some things just need to be absorbed. But something was different. The distance that had been part of every room, they shared the careful 6 inches of space, the managed eye contact, the deliberate normalcy, was not the same distance anymore. It was smaller. Not gone, but smaller. Pete noticed it when he came in from clearing the south path. He said nothing. He poured himself coffee and looked at the two of them at the table, with their ledger and their list of storm damage to assess. And he poured himself coffee and went back outside with the expression of a man who has witnessed something and intends to respect it by pretending he hasn't. The damage from the storm kept them busy for 3 days. A section of roof on the smaller outbuilding, 2 sections of fence that had collapsed under snow load, a window shutter that had come entirely off and needed replacing. Nathan and Grace and Pete worked through it with the systematic efficiency of people who had now been working together long enough to stop explaining things to each other. They moved like a team that had been one for longer than it actually had. On the second day of storm cleanup, while they were assessing the outbuilding roof, Pete slipped on the iced ladder and came down hard on his arm. Grace was the one who got there first. She had him sitting on the ground, with his arm examined, not broken. Badly sprained, wrapped with a strip of cloth from her own underskirt before Nathan had crossed the yard at a run. Sit still, she told Pete firmly. You're going to sit still for the rest of today. I'm all right, Pete said, with the specific expression of a man who is not all right, and knows it, and doesn't want to admit it in front of a woman. Your arm is swelling, she said. You're going to sit still. Nathan can finish the roof with me. Pete looked at Nathan with an expression that said multiple things. Nathan said, she's right, go inside. Pete went inside. Grace stood up and looked at the ladder and the roof and calculated something with her eyes, and then looked at Nathan. I'll go up, you hand me what I need from below. I'll go up, I'm lighter, I'm taller. That's not relevant. It is when the roof is iced. She looked at him. He looked back. The particular standoff of two people who are both competent and neither is willing to be managed. Together, she said. You on the left section. Me on the right. All right, he said. They worked the roof for 2 hours in the hard cold. And it was some of the most focused and fluent work Nathan had done in years, not because it was easy, but because she anticipated what he needed almost before he needed it. And he found himself doing the same for her, and the work moved forward with a kind of rhythm that was something more than efficiency. When they came down, their hands were frozen and the job was done, and Grace's cheeks were red from the cold, and her hair had come entirely loose from its pins, and she looked, Nathan thought, completely unremarkable and completely extraordinary at the same time. He did not say this, he said, "Coffee." "Yes," she said. They went inside. Pete was sitting at the kitchen table with his arm elevated on a rolled blanket and the expression of a man who had been thinking about things while they were outside. "You know," Pete said, "when you first arrived, ma'am, I thought you were going to be a problem." Grace looked at him as she hung her coat. "And now?" "Now I think Nathan's the problem," Pete said. "And you're the solution," Nathan said. "You can go back to the bunkhouse any time." "My arm hurts," Pete said placidly. "I need to rest." Grace laughed. Nathan looked at the stove. He was definitely smiling. He was simply declining to confirm it. The letter from Crane arrived 4 days after the storm. It was brief and measured and informed them that he had written to Douglas Hale's Cheyenne representative with a summary of the evidence in their possession and an outline of the counterclaims available to Miss Whitmore should the matter proceed to court. The Cheyenne representative had responded within 48 hours. They were withdrawing the claim. Grace read the letter twice at the kitchen table while Nathan watched her face. "It's over," she said. "The legal piece of it," Nathan said. "Crane says Hale may try other approaches, but without the claim, he has no formal mechanism. He'd have to come here himself, and that would expose him." Grace set the letter down on the table. She pressed both hands flat on it. She breathed. "It's over," she said again. And this time it was not a question. "Yes," Nathan said. She sat very still for a moment with her hands flat on the letter and something moving across her face that was not just relief. It was deeper than relief. It was the expression of a person who has been holding a weight for so long that they'd forgotten what their own body felt like without it. And now, with the weight gone, there was an almost dizzying unfamiliarity to the lightness. She looked up at him. "Thank you," she said. And unlike the thanks she'd given in the cold of the barn, or the careful thanks after he'd made coffee that first terrible morning, this one was different. It came from somewhere lower and realer and more open than anything she'd said to him before. "It was Crane," Nathan said. "And the letters you kept." "No," she said. "It was you. He didn't know what to do with that. So he did what he did when he didn't know what to do. He stood up and said he was going to check on Pete's arm and see if he was fit to work tomorrow." Grace watched him go. She sat alone at the kitchen table with the letter under her hands and the winter light coming through the window and the house warm around her. And she thought about what it meant to be in a place where someone had decided your battle was theirs. She thought about what that meant. She thought about the man in the next room who moved through his own grief like a man carrying something heavy on a long road, not bowed by it, just shaped by it, permanently and honestly, and who had sat with her in a storm, and told her about his wife with the raw honesty of someone who had nothing left to protect. She pressed her fingers against the letter. She thought about spring. She thought about the garden she was already planning. She thought, "If I am still here at spring, I will not be here because I have nowhere else to go." That thought settled into her like something solid, like something she intended to keep. Outside, the valley was buried in white, and the sky was clear and hard, and the coal ranch sat under it with its solid walls and its repaired roof and its mended fences, looking for the first time in a long time like a place that was being lived in and not merely inhabited. And inside, a man who had come to the station to say no was already working out how to say something entirely different, in a language he had nearly forgotten, to the only person who had ever made forgetting it feel like the mistake it actually was. The week after Crane's letter arrived, something shifted in the ranch that had no single name and no single moment of origin. It was a collection of things. Small things, the kind that accumulate without announcement. It was Grace humming while she worked in the kitchen, not performing happiness. Just the unconscious sound of a person whose guard had come down one layer. Nathan heard it the first morning, and stopped in the hallway, and listened for a moment before continuing on, and said nothing about it. But the sound stayed with him, the way sounds do when they fill a space that has been quiet too long. It was Nathan beginning to linger at the supper table, instead of finishing and standing immediately. He had always eaten quickly, efficiently, the way a man eats when food is fuel, and the table is just where the fuel gets loaded. Now he stayed. He not probing one's practical ones. About what she'd seen in the south pasture, about what Pete had said, about the condition of the back hay, about whether the supply run to Millbrook had turned up anything useful. But questions, directed at her, with the specific attention of a man who has decided that what another person thinks is worth hearing. It was Pete, who noticed everything and commented on almost nothing. Catching Nathan watching cross the yard one morning with the unself-conscious look of someone who has forgotten to guard his expression, and who filed this observation away with considerable satisfaction. It was Martha, who came on her bi-weekly visit and found the kitchen warm and dinner already started, and Grace and Nathan arguing companionably about whether the east pasture needed reseeding this spring or could go another season arguing in the way people argue, when they respect each other's opinion enough to push back against it, and who sat down at the pulpit and said almost nothing for 2 hours, and went home and told her husband that her brother was going to be all right. Her husband said, "About time." Martha said, "Don't." He said, "I'm just saying," she said. "I know what you're saying, and don't say it yet, because he'll find some way to ruin it if he thinks people are watching." Her husband, who understood Nathan Cole nearly as well as his wife did, agreed that this was probably true. The ranch itself was responding to the change in ways that were visible to anyone who had known it before. The ledger numbers, which Nathan reviewed every Sunday evening, were no longer simply a record of what had been spent. They were the beginning of a plan columns that Grace had quietly reorganized into categories that tracked not just expenditure but yield, not just cost but efficiency. She had not asked his permission to restructure the ledger. She had simply done it one evening while he was out checking the cattle. And when he sat down with it the following Sunday and spent 20 minutes understanding what she'd done, he had looked up and found her watching him from across the room. "If you'd rather it the old way," she said. "No," he said. "This is better." She went back to her mending. He went back to the ledger. And the number he noticed, the one that he had not been looking for, and that stopped him on the page, was the projection column she had added at the far right of each month. Not optimistic projections. Careful, grounded ones. Based on the current cattle weight, the expected yield of the garden she was planning, the savings from the feed supplier switch they'd made after Millbrook. The projections extended to the end of the year. She was planning to the end of the year. He sat with that for a long time. Then he took the ledger to the kitchen table and said, "Walk me through this column." She came and sat across from him and walked him through it. And they spent 2 hours going through numbers and plans and the particular arithmetic of a small ranch trying to move from surviving to growing. And when they finished, Nathan had 3 pages of notes in his own hand, and the distinct feeling that he was looking at a future that had shape and direction. He hadn't felt that about this land in 5 years. He didn't say that, but Grace was watching him when he closed the ledger, and something in her expression said she understood it without being told. The disruption came from Millbrook, as disruptions in small western valleys often do, in the form of a man who had been talking too much. His name was Garrett, and he ran the feed operation there. He was a man of negligible personal character who compensated for this with an abundant enthusiasm for other people's business. When Nathan and Grace had ridden to Millbrook 3 weeks prior to inspect the feed, Garrett had noted the situation: unmarried man, mail order bride, arrived from the east and had drawn his own conclusions about what kind of woman would make such an arrangement, and had been sharing those conclusions with anyone who would listen in both Millbrook and Red Hollow ever since. Nathan learned about this from Mrs. Harlow, who came to the ranch on a Thursday with her preserves and her directness, and who told him plainly that Garrett had been saying things about Grace that were not true, not kind, and Mrs. Harlow's particular emphasis not going to stop on their own. "What things?" Nathan said. Mrs. Harlow told him. Nathan's face did a thing it did rarely, that it went very still in the specific way of something about to become very decided. "Does Grace know?" he asked. "I don't know what she's heard, Mrs. Harlow said. "I came to you first because you're the one who can do something about it, and because she looked like a girl who's had enough people taking shots at her name." Nathan thanked her and saw her to her wagon and went to find Grace. She was in the garden, the one she had spent the winter preparing, the first green of early spring, now showing in the rows she'd planted, and she was crouched in the soil, with her hands in the dirt, and an expression of quiet concentration. And Nathan stood at the garden's edge for a moment, and watched her, and thought about all the ways a person's name can be taken from them, and felt something that was not entirely anger, but had anger in it. "Grace," he said. She looked up, saw his face, stood immediately. "What happened?" "There's a man in Millbrook," he said. He told her plainly what Garrett had been saying. He did not soften it. She was not a woman who benefited from being protected from the shape of a problem. She listened. Her face was still. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "I see," she said. "I'm going to Millbrook," he said. "To do what?" "To make clear to Mr. Garrett what happens to men who traffic in lies about people who live under my roof." "Nathan, I'm not asking permission. I'm not asking you to." She looked at him directly. "I'm asking you what you plan to say, because if you go in there angry and make it a confrontation, it becomes a story. If you go in there with something else, it becomes a correction." She crossed her arms. "Let me come with you." He looked at her. "If you go alone, it's a man defending a woman," she said. "If we go together, it's two people who don't have anything to hide and aren't ashamed of what they are. That's different. That's harder to talk around." He was quiet for a moment. "You're right," he said. "I know," she said. "Give me 20 minutes." They rode to Millbrook the following morning. Garrett was at his feed operation when they arrived. He was a heavy-set man with a salesman's instinct for reading a room. And the room he was reading, when Nathan Cole walked through his door with Grace Whitmore beside him, was one that immediately communicated that something had changed about the acceptable terms of the conversation. "Mr. Cole," Garrett said, with the careful warmth of a man who has been caught and is hoping the net is smaller than it feels. "Garrett," Nathan said. He was not angry. He was something quieter than anger, which is more dangerous. "I've been hearing about conversations you've been having." "About Miss Whitmore." Garrett looked at Grace, then back at Nathan. "Just talk," he said. "Nothing meant by, 'What specifically have you been saying?'" Grace said. Her voice was even. Her gaze was the direct, steady one that Nathan had first seen at the train station, the one that told you she had decided not to look away. Garrett cleared his throat. "I might have speculated about the nature of my character," Grace said, "based on the fact that I came west on a matrimonial advertisement." She tilted her head slightly. "Before you say anything further, you should know that I have lived on the coal ranch for over a month. In that time, I have helped repair the north pump line, restructured the ranch accounts, assisted in storm damage repair, and have been received at the Whitfields' table for Sunday dinner. Mrs. Harlow considers me a neighbor. She let that land. Whatever story you told about me does not match the woman standing in front of you. I suggest you be careful about which version you continue to tell." Garrett was silent. "And I'd like your best price on spring feed," she said. "Since we're here." They left Millbrook with a corrected supplier price and the full understanding that Garrett would find other topics to occupy himself with going forward. Nathan knew, from watching how the man had looked at Grace for the last half of that conversation, that the correction would hold. There are some people you underestimate once. On the ride back, Nathan looked at her and said, "You didn't need me there. I needed you there," she said. "I needed to not be alone in the room. That's different from needing me to handle it." "Yes," she said. "It is." He watched the road. "You handle most things yourself," he said. "You always have. I've had to," she said. There was no one else. A pause. "That's not a complaint. It's just true." "It doesn't have to stay true," he said. The words came out before he'd fully decided to say them. He heard them in the air between them and felt the particular suspended quality of a moment that has been said and cannot be taken back and is now waiting to see what it becomes. Grace looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road. "Nathan," she said. "I mean on the ranch," he said. "There's Pete, there's Mrs. Harlow, there's Martha." He knew he was retreating. He could hear himself doing it. "You don't have to manage everything alone." Grace was quiet for a moment. "All right," she said softly. She was not fooled. They both knew it. But she let him retreat because she understood in the way. She understood most things about him, now that the man beside her moved toward things at the pace he was capable of. And that pushing faster than that pace would not get her there sooner. It would only make him stumble. She looked at the road. She would wait. She was good at that too. What neither of them anticipated was that the thing which finally broke the carefully managed distance between them would not be a dramatic moment. It would not be the storm or the letter or the confrontation in Millbrook. It would be a Tuesday evening in early spring with the kitchen warm and the windows showing the last light of a longer day. And Pete's voice from the yard saying Nathan's name with a tone that brought Nathan to his feet before he'd consciously heard the urgency in it. He went outside. Pete was standing by the barn with the particular look of a man who has been holding bad news and has reached the end of how long he can hold it. "Calhoun's been to see Aldous Crane," Pete said. Nathan went still. "What?" Calhoun was the largest landowner in the valley. He was a man who had, for the past 3 years, been quietly and methodically working to acquire smaller ranches when their owners hit hard seasons. He had bought out 2 properties the previous fall. He had made Nathan an offer on the coal ranch 18 months ago that Nathan had refused. Calhoun went to Crane about a grazing rights claim, Pete said, on the eastern boundary. He's saying there's an old survey that puts the boundary line 200 yards inside what we've been working as our land. Nathan felt the cold of it move through him. "That's not true." "I know it's not true. But Crane says Calhoun has a surveyor's document from 1879 that he's claiming supports it." Pete looked at him steadily. "If the boundary shifts, we lose the east pasture. And the south water access goes with it. Without the east pasture and the south water..." The coal ranch was not a struggling ranch. It was a dead one. Nathan went inside. Grace read his face the moment he walked through the door. "Sit down," she said. She put coffee in front of him. "Tell me," he told her. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she sat across from him and was quiet for a moment, in the way she was quiet when she was thinking, rather than reacting. "The 1879 survey," she said. "Do you have the original deed?" "The survey from when your father bought the land? Yes. It's in the document box in my room. Get it." He got it. She spread it on the table and looked at it with the same focused attention she'd brought to the ledger. The same systematic patience. She studied the boundary descriptions. She studied the markings. Nathan watched her read and tried to see what she was seeing. "Here," she said. She put her finger on a line of text. "The eastern boundary is described relative to the old creek fork. The 1879 survey would have been made before the creek shifted. If the creek shifted after 1879, she looked up, then any survey based on the old creek position would misrepresent the actual boundary of the land as it was deeded." Nathan stared at her. The south branch of Red Hollow Creek shifted in the flood of 1883. I remember it. My father had to reroute 2 fence lines because of it. Is there documentation of the flood? The county records would have it. And I know at least 3 men in this valley who remember it. Grace sat back. Then Calhoun's survey is based on a pre-flood geography that doesn't match the actual land anymore. And your deed describes the boundary in relationship to a physical feature that moved. Which means the legal boundary is where the creek was when the deed was signed, not where an 20,879 survey placed it. Nathan looked at her across the table. You understood that from a deed, he said. My uncle had a boundary dispute with his neighbor when I was 14, she said. I sat through every conversation about it. I read every document. I had nothing else to do on a farm in the winter. She met his gaze. Crane needs to see this deed, and he needs to talk to the men who remember the 1883 flood. I can name 6 of them without trying, Nathan said. Then we go to Crane tomorrow morning, she said. First thing. They went to Crane first thing. The lawyer looked at the deed for a long time. He looked at it the way lawyers look at things when they are deciding how much to allow themselves to hope. The creek shift is the key, he said finally. If the 1883 flood is documented in county records, and we have witnesses who can testify to the shift, Calhoun's 1879 survey becomes a document of a geography that no longer exists. He looked at Grace. How did you identify this? I read the deed carefully, she said. Crane looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at the table. Bring me the witnesses, Crane said, and the county flood records. I'll handle the rest. They spent the next 10 days building the case. Nathan rode to every man he knew who remembered 1883. Grace organized the testimony who remembered what, in what form, what could be sworn to and what couldn't. She went to the county records office herself with a list of what she was looking for, and came back with copies of 3 documents that mapped the creek's course before and after the flood. Crane said it was the cleanest counterclaim he'd assembled in 20 years. When the hearing date arrived, Calhoun's lawyer looked at the evidence Crane presented and asked for a recess. Calhoun's claim was withdrawn before the end of the day. Nathan heard the news from Crane in the hallway outside the hearing room, and he stood very still for a moment, with the information settling into him. The east pasture, the southwater excess, the ranch. He went outside. Grace was waiting in the yard because she had not been permitted in the hearing and had spent 2 hours sitting on a bench with her hands folded and her face composed and her jaw set. She saw his face when he came out. It's done, he said. She closed her eyes. He watched her, the specific exhale of someone whose body had been carrying a level of tension that they were not fully admitting to until it was released. She had done this for his ranch. She had read his deed and identified the legal argument, and organized the witnesses and found the county records. She had done it with the same quiet, systematic competence she brought to everything. And he had watched her do it, and something in him had been steadily unraveling for 10 days in the direction of a truth that he could no longer reasonably avoid. She opened her eyes. Good, she said. Her voice was not quite steady. Grace, he said, Nathan, I need to say something. She looked at him. The careful expression was there, the guarded one. The one she wore when she was managing the distance between what she felt and what she showed. But underneath it, in the dark steadiness of her eyes, was something that was not guarded at all. I came to the station to send you back, he said. I had decided. I had reasons I thought were good ones. I didn't want someone depending on me. I didn't want another chance to lose someone. I know, she said softly. I was wrong about all of it, he said. Not about the pain. The pain was real. But about what it meant. About what I was allowed to do with the rest of my life. He looked at her directly, the way she always looked at him. The way he had been learning from her for 3 months. You didn't come here to save me. I know that. You came here for ground of your own. And I think you have it. I think this is yours as much as mine. If you want it. She was very still. "What are you saying?" she said carefully. "I'm saying I don't want you to leave when spring is over," he said. "I'm saying the house is different with you in it, and the land is different, and I am different. And I have been trying not to say it, because saying it means I have to believe I deserve it." He stopped. His voice had roughed itself. "I don't know if I deserve it." Grace took one step toward him. "You do," she said, simply. Certain. The way she said all the true things. "I loved Clara," he said. I know you loved her," Grace said. "I don't need you not to. I never needed that." She looked at him with the directness that had never once in 3 months looked away. "I need someone who stays, who shows up, who comes to Crane's office and stands in a cold barn and doesn't let a man in Millbrook or a man in Philadelphia decide what my life looks like." Her voice was low and precise. "You did all of that, without being asked." "I would do it again," he said. "I know," she said. They stood in the yard outside the hearing room in the early spring light, and everything that had been building since a crying woman stepped off a train at Red Hollow Station was present in the space between them. Quiet and enormous and entirely real. Nathan reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically. Not with any declaration beyond the gesture itself. Just took her hand. And Grace Whitmore, who had traveled 1,000 miles with a cracked suitcase and not enough money, and a ruined name, who had worked through a Wyoming winter and a blizzard and a legal threat and a land dispute without asking for more than she could carry, she looked down at his hand around hers and then looked up at his face. And she did not let go. They walked back toward where the horses were tied. Pete was waiting with them. He had insisted on coming, on the grounds that his arm was well enough, and someone had to hold the horses. He looked at their joined hands with the expression of a man who has been expecting this for some time and is gratified to be proven right. He said nothing. He untied the horses and handed them over and swung up onto his own and very deliberately looked at the road ahead. Nathan looked at him. "Not a word," Nathan said. "I wasn't going to say anything," Pete said. "You were absolutely going to say something." "I was going to say," Pete said, with the gravity of a man choosing his words carefully, "that it's a fine day for a ride home." It was. The sun was fully out for the first time in weeks. The valley was green, with the particular urgent green of early Wyoming spring. The kind that comes in hard after a long winter, as if making up for lost time. The road home was clear, and the horses were glad of the warmth, and the coal ranch waited at the end of the ridge. Its solid walls, and repaired roof and cleared garden, and mended fences, all evidence of a place that had been brought back from the edge of something by the specific competition of a stubborn man and a woman who refused to stay invisible. Grace rode with her face turned to the sun. Nathan rode beside her and watched the road and felt, for the first time in 5 years, that the direction the road was going was somewhere he wanted to go. He did not say this out loud, but he held her gaze when she turned, briefly to look at him, and he did not look away. Spring came to Red Hollow Valley with a kind of insistence that felt almost personal. The morning after they rode back from the hearing, Nathan woke to the sound of Grace already in the garden. Not the sound of her inside the house, the familiar kitchen sounds he had grown so accustomed to that their absence would now feel louder than their presence, but outside, in the early light, her voice carrying across the yard as she talked to Pete about the second row of seed planting. Just talking. Easy, like someone who had decided without ceremony that this was her place and these were her people, and she was going to act accordingly. Nathan stood at his bedroom window and listened. He had held her hand on the road back from Crane's office, and he had not said anything more than what he'd already said, and she had not asked him to. They had ridden home with Pete, pointedly studying the horizon and the warmth of that spring afternoon between them. And, when they arrived at the ranch, she had gone to check on the garden, and he had gone to the barn, and they had moved through supper, the way they always did side by side. Practical, honest, except that when their eyes met across the table, there was no longer the careful management of distance in it. The distance was gone. What replaced it was something neither of them had named yet. and both of them were moving around it with the particular care of people who know that a thing named too quickly can be frightened out of existence. Martha arrived on Saturday. She came through the door with a basket and a look on her face that told Nathan immediately that she already knew something, which meant Mrs. Harlow had talked, which meant a trait, which meant by Sunday the entirety of Red Hollow Valley would know that Nathan Cole had held Grace Whitmore's hand on the road, home from the hearing, and nobody had looked surprised about it. He said, "Whatever you've heard." "I heard you won the Calhoun claim," Martha said innocently. She set the basket on the table. "I came to celebrate." "Where's Grace Garden?" Martha went to the garden. Nathan stayed in the kitchen and listened to his sister's voice outside shift into the particular register she used when she was deeply, thoroughly pleased about something and exercising significant restraint about it. He put the kettle on. He heard Grace laugh at something Martha said. He stared at the kettle. The thing about holding someone's hand, Nathan was discovering, was that it changed every subsequent moment you spent in the same space as them. Not dramatically. Not in a way that had any single identifiable feature. Just the room arranged itself differently when she came into it. His attention recalibrated without being asked. When she spoke, the information went somewhere it hadn't gone before. Into a part of him that was paying attention, not just to the content, but to the voice itself. The cadence, the specific way she chose words. He had been aware of her for 3 months. He was now aware of her differently. Martha came back inside and looked at him standing at the stove and said, "You look like a man trying very hard to look like nothing is happening." "The kettle's about to boil," he said. Nathan. He looked at her. Her face was not triumphant. It was just open. The way Martha's face was when she dropped the performance of casual observation and looked at him the way she'd looked at him since they were children. With the unguarded love of someone who had been in his corner for every version of him. "I know," he said before she could say it. "She's good," Martha said. "She's genuinely good. Not just for the ranch. For you, I know," he said again. "Do you know what you're going to do about it?" "I'm working on it." "Work faster," Martha said. "Winter's over. She came here with one suitcase and nothing holding her. Give her a reason to unpack completely." He looked at his sister for a long moment. "I didn't ask for your advice," he said. "You never do," Martha said pleasantly. "That's never stopped me." Grace came inside before he could respond. Cheeks warm from the garden and soil on her hands. And whatever Nathan was going to say to Martha dissolved entirely, because Grace looked up and found him watching her, and something crossed her face quick. Real, not hidden, before she looked down at her hands and said she needed to wash up before tea. Martha watched Nathan watch Grace leave the room. She picked up her teacup. She said absolutely nothing. She didn't need to. The moment that broke open, everything that was still being carefully managed came from a direction nobody expected. It came from Douglas Hale. A letter arrived on a Wednesday, and it was not addressed to Grace. It was addressed to Nathan. On law firm letterhead, not the Cheyenne representative this time, but a Denver firm, which meant Hale had escalated. The letter was formal and cold, and informed Nathan Cole that he was harboring a woman against whom a claim of fraud had been prepared, and that by providing her shelter and resources, he was potentially liable as an accessory to her alleged actions, and that, unless Miss Whitmore agreed to return to Philadelphia voluntarily to address the matter, the firm would be pursuing every available legal avenue against both parties. Nathan read it standing at the kitchen table. Grace saw his face and said, "What is it?" He handed it to her. She read it. Her face went through several things, very fast recognition. Then cold fury. Then something harder and more settled than either. "He's coming after you now," she said. Her voice was flat. "He's trying to use me to get to you," Nathan said. "That's different. It's the same result. You're in it now because of me." She set the letter down on the table. "I'll go to Crane." We'll go to Crane," Nathan said. "Together, Nathan. This is my problem, Grace." His voice was not loud, but it was very certain. Stop, she stopped. I told you at the station this wasn't what I expected. I told you the ranch was rough. I told you I wasn't easy to live with. He looked at her directly. I did not tell you that I would let a man who tried to destroy your name and now has the nerve to threaten mine simply continue doing it from a distance. He picked up the letter. This is my problem because he made it my problem. And because anything that happens to you is. He stopped himself on the edge of something. She was watching him very carefully. Is what? She said. He looked at the letter in his hand. Is my concern, he said. It's my concern, Grace. The kitchen was very quiet. All right, she said softly. We go to Crane together. They went to Crane together. Crane read the letter with the expression of a man who has seen this kind of move before and found it both predictable and tiresome. He's escalating because the first withdrawal embarrassed him, Crane said. Men like Hale don't lose gracefully. This Denver firm is a more expensive weapon. But it's still the same underlying claim, which is still as weak as it was 3 months ago. He set the letter down. I want to do something different this time. What? Nathan said. I want to write to the Denver firm and copy the Philadelphia Bar Association and the Philadelphia courts, Crane said. I want to formally notify them that our client possesses correspondency establishing that Douglas Hale misrepresented his marital status to multiple women for purposes of financial and personal gain, and that should this matter proceed in any court, in any territory, that correspondence will become part of the public record. He looked at both of them. We don't file anything, we don't sue. We simply make clear that proceeding will cost him more than stopping. Grace said. You'd be threatening him. I'd be informing him of consequences, Crane said. There's a legal distinction, and I'd argue a moral one. He looked at her. He has been threatening you for months, Miss Whitmore. From behind the protection of law firms and money and distance. I am proposing that we use the same tools in the same direction. Grace sat with this for a moment. Nathan watched her think. He had learned to recognize when she was working through something versus when she had already decided. The difference was subtle. A particular quality of stillness, and right now it was the former. Do it, she said. Crane nodded. Give me 3 days. 3 days later, Douglas Hale went silent. Not a response. Not a withdrawal. Just silence, which was its own kind of answer. The Denver firm sent a brief, neutral note stating that they were reviewing the matter. They never wrote again. Crane, who had 30 years of reading legal silences, told them it was over. He found out what it would cost him, Crane said simply. He chose differently. Grace sat in Crane's office and heard this, and did not cry, and did not make a sound. She just sat with it. Nathan, beside her, watched the slow exhale of someone who has been holding their breath for a very long time, and has just been told they can stop. On the ride home, she said, it's really over. Yes, he said. All of it. All of it. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, I need to tell you something. He waited. When I got on that train, she said, I had $12, and the clothes in that suitcase, and a letter from your sister, so many times I had it memorized. She looked at her hands on the reins. I told myself I was coming here for ground of my own. Just ground. Somewhere to stand. I told myself that was all I needed and all I was going to ask for. I know, he said. I wasn't telling myself the whole truth, she said. He looked at her. I wanted to matter to someone, she said. Plainly, without performance. Not in a way that required them to manage me or protect me or carry me. Just to be in a place where my presence changed something. Where the work I did made a difference that someone noticed. She looked at him. You noticed. From the beginning, you noticed. You didn't say it. But you noticed. He was very still on the wagon bench. I noticed, he said. I know, she said. That's what I'm telling you. They arrived at the ranch in the early afternoon. And the garden was green and full of the things she had planted through the tail end of winter and into the first warmth. And the north pump ran clean and steady, and the east pasture fence was solid. And the cattle, in the south field, had the weight and condition of animals that were being managed by people who cared about the long future of the place. Nathan helped her down from the wagon. He did not let go of her hand when she was down. She looked at him. "I have something to ask you," he said. "All right," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not uncertain. Nathan Cole had not been uncertain about this for some time. Just finding the right words, which had never been his easiest tool. "I went to the station to send you home," he said. "And then I couldn't. And I told myself because you'd asked for something I could give. Just a chance, just work." He looked at their joined hands. That wasn't the whole truth either. She waited. "I couldn't send you back because you looked at that town like someone deciding whether they had anything left," he said. "And then you decided you did. And you straightened up. And you looked at me, and you asked for nothing you hadn't earned." He looked up at her. "I have never seen anyone stand up the way you do. Under all of it, every time." Her eyes were bright. "Grace Whitmore," he said, "I am asking you to stay. Not because the ranch needs you, though it does. Not because I can offer you something safe and easy, because I can't. And you know I can't, and I think you'd trust it less if I could." He held her gaze. "I am asking you to stay because this is your home, and I want to be your home too. If you'll have a man who is still learning how to be present in his own life." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You have been present in your own life since November. You just didn't notice. Is that a yes?" he said. "It's a yes," she said. "It has been a yes for a long time," he exhaled. She laughed, the real one, the one that changed her face completely, and it was the best sound that Yard had ever held. He was smiling. Actually smiling. Not the almost smile that Martha teased him about. The real thing. Unpracticed. Slightly disbelieving. Entirely genuine. Pete came around the corner of the barn at precisely this moment. Stopped. Looked at them. Said, "About time," with the conviction of a man who has been waiting on a verdict for months. And walked away before Nathan could say anything. Nathan looked after him. "I'm going to need to find a replacement ranch hand." "You're not firing Pete," Grace said. "I might fire Pete." "You won't," she said. "You like him. I respect his work," Nathan said. "That's different from liking him." She looked at him with the expression of a woman who knows exactly when a man is lying about his own affections. "You like him," she said. He looked at the barn. "He's competent," he said. She laughed again. "They told Martha on Sunday, or rather, Martha arrived on Sunday and took one look at the two of them at the kitchen table with Nathan's hand over Grace's and said, finally, and sat down and poured herself coffee and acted as though this had always been the obvious destination and she had simply been patient. "I knew from the letter," Martha told Grace. "The letter I got from you before you arrived. Most women write about what they're hoping for. You wrote about what you could do. I thought that's the one. That's who he needs." "You gambled with your brother's life," Grace said. "I gambled correctly," Martha said without remorse. Nathan said, "She does that." "It's worked every time," Martha said. "Twice," he said. "It's worked twice." "I have a good record," Martha said. Grace looked between them with the expression of someone who has realized recently, and with great warmth, that she has acquired not just a home but a family. The kind of family that argues affectionately and shows up without being asked and is occasionally infuriating and is never, under any circumstances, absent when it matters. Her cousin in Philadelphia had written again. A careful letter, apologetic about the information she'd let slip to Hale, asking how Grace was. Grace had written back honestly, not everything, but enough. She said she was well. She said she was working. She said she had found somewhere that felt like it was hers. She did not yet know how to write. "I have found something I thought didn't exist anymore." She would find the words eventually. The wedding was on a Thursday in late May, which Grace chose because Thursday had no particular significance to anyone, and she liked the idea of a day that belonged entirely to what was happening in it, rather than to any prior association. Crane came. The Whitfields came, and Edna Whitfield cried in the open. Generous way of someone who considers other people's happiness a personal gift to themselves. Mrs. Harlow brought preserves and wore her best hat, and told Nathan afterward that he had better sense than she'd originally given him credit for, which Nathan received as the high compliment she intended. Pete had cleaned up considerably for the occasion, and stood in the back with his hat in his hands, and the expression of a man who was privately very pleased about how things had turned out. The ceremony was short. Grace had wanted it short. She had said, when they were discussing it, "I don't need a long ceremony. I need a true one." It was true. When Nathan said his vows, he said them, looking at her directly. The way he looked at all the things he meant. He said he would show up. He said he would stay. He said he had been a man who stopped living for a while and intended never to be that man again. And that she was the reason he understood the difference between surviving and actually being alive in his own life. She said she had come to Wyoming with $12 and a borrowed faith in the idea that somewhere there was ground worth standing on. And she had found it, and it was not just the land she meant. There was not a dry eye in the room. Pete had to look at the ceiling. Crane cleared his throat several times unnecessarily. Martha made no effort whatsoever to compose herself, and her husband put his arm around her and let her cry as completely as she wanted to. After the ceremony, walking back through the valley toward the ranch with Grace beside him and the whole long Wyoming afternoon ahead of them, Nathan said, "I thought about what you told me, about coming here with $12 and one suitcase." "What about it?" she said. "I want to know," he said. "All of it. Everything before the train. Not because I need to, because I want to know who you were before I knew you." She looked at him. "All of it," she said. "Everything you want to tell," he said. "And the rest, whenever you're ready." She took his arm. She started talking, and Nathan Cole, who had spent 5 years in the loudest silence a man can live in, listened with the full, undivided attention of someone who understands. Finally, that the story someone tells you about themselves before they knew you is not the prelude to who they are. It is the explanation of how they became worth knowing. Summer came to Cole Ranch the way summer comes to Wyoming, fast and committed, after a winter that left no doubt about its seriousness. The garden that Grace had started turning in November was full and productive by July, and what it produced went further than the two of them needed. So she began trading the surplus with Mrs. Harlow and the Whitfields, and 2 families further down the valley who had harder seasons than most. The ledger that she had restructured in January showed, by August, numbers that were not just surviving, they were growing. Nathan rode the east pasture on a Tuesday afternoon in August, and checked the fence lines that had been repaired, and checked the cattle that were well conditioned, and moving with the easy confidence of animals on good land. And he thought about Calhoun's claim, and how close it had come, and what would have been left if it had succeeded. He thought about the woman at home who had read a deed and seen what he hadn't seen. He turned the horse back toward the ranch. She was in the garden when he came over the ridge, and she looked up when she heard the horse and shaded her eyes against the afternoon sun. And even at that distance, he could see her expression shift into the specific warmth. She had stopped trying to manage around him. He waved. She waved back, rode down. There were things that still lived in Nathan Cole that would always live there: the grief for Clara, the years of absence, the specific weight of a loss that does not dissolve but that you learn, slowly and imperfectly, to carry alongside everything else. He did not pretend otherwise, and Grace did not ask him to. She had known from the beginning that she was not replacing anything. She was not a substitution. She was something entirely different. Something that grew in the space beside the grief rather than over it. The way a garden grows on ground that has known hard winters and is richer for them. He helped her bring the last of the day's harvest inside. She told him what Pete had said that afternoon that had made her laugh so hard she'd had to sit down. He told her about the east fence and the condition of the cattle and his conversation with Old Man Whitfield about next year's seed. They made supper together in the kitchen that was warm and full and smelled of the herbs she had planted in the window box in March. And the house held them, the way a house holds people who have learned to be honest with each other without pretense, without performance, with the simple and extraordinary dignity of two people who chose each other clearly and are living inside that choice every day. That night, after the lamps were turned low and the house was quiet, Grace said into the dark, "I used to think the bravest thing I did was getting on that train, and now?" Nathan said. "Now I think the bravest thing I did was stay," she said. "When I could have left. When it would have been easier to take what you offered and keep moving and not let any of it matter." She was quiet for a moment. Letting it matter was the brave part. He found her hand in the dark. "I know, he said I was there." She laughed softly. He held her hand, and the Wyoming night was enormous around them, and the stars were out, the way stars are only out in places where the world has not yet gotten too loud for them. And the coal ranch sat under all of it, with its solid walls and its green garden and its repaired fences, whole and purposeful, and inhabited by people who had earned every corner of it. In Red Hollow Valley, for years after, people told the story, the way people tell the stories that matter, the ones that carry something true in them, the ones that get passed from one person to the next because they hold something worth holding. They told it about the man who had come to the station to say no and could not do it. They told it about the woman who had stepped off the train with silent tears and $12 and a spine that bent but did not break. They told it about the ranch that came back from the edge of nothing. They told it about the winter that broke them both open. And they always ended it the same way, with the part they considered most important. The part that made it worth telling, the man who swore he would never love again chose, on a Thursday in late May, to be wrong about that, and it was the most honest thing he ever did, the truest decision he ever made, and the one that finally brought him back, fully and without reservation, to the life he had never stopped deserving. Some loves do not announce themselves. They arrive at train stations with worn suitcases and quiet tears and ask for nothing but a chance. And the wise ones, the ones worth becoming, recognize that chance for what it is and do not let it walk away. Nathan Cole was not a man who made the same mistake twice. And Grace Whitmore never needed a rescue. She needed a home. She found one, and she built everything else herself.